Okay, in the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to draw and develop a diagram for a Podzol soil, which appears in the higher biosphere topic in geography. Now, on your screen, you will see a typical Podzol diagram, and this is a soil, and we're looking at the soil profile in this case, along with a range of labels. Now, before you go any further into maybe pausing the video and copying this down, let's just explore, first of all, how to construct a good diagram in an exam. What are the key bits of your diagram for a Podzol, or indeed any of the soil profiles that you're being asked? And what I would strongly recommend that you do to start with is just draw out your basic rectangle that you're going to turn into your soil profile, which I'm doing on your screen, and you'll see that. What you then want to do is add our main vegetation, which in this case is a pine tree. And pine trees have very shallow roots, so you want to show the root system in your diagram, but not going very deep, not going beyond your A horizon. Talk more about that in a second. You might even want to turn this into a little Christmas tree or pine tree, just to indicate to the examiner that that is the vegetation. But we do have a label that picks up on that later on. Other good important part of your diagram is that you draw a dividing line between each of your horizons. I'm just going to do it as a straight line here. And that you label the horizons. So we have our A, we have our B, and down here we have our C. So let's just put that horizon on. So we've got 3 layers at the moment. We've got A, B, and C. And what I suggest you also do is you add in the top hummus layer, which is known as the O horizon. Okay. Now, before we leave this diagram drawing, there is one other element you want to bring in your diagram, and you'll see it here. It should be drawn into the B horizon somewhere, and this is your iron pan, because that's one of the key features of our Podzol. One other thing that you want to check on your diagram is that your B horizon is bigger than your A horizon, because the B horizon in a Podzol is much higher. The width of the C horizon down here is irrelevant, and you can put in some boulders if you want. That's purely for diagram drawing. You don't need to do this if you don't feel. One key thing is there aren't any marks for the diagram, but if you have a different sized A and B horizon, you'll be fine. If you draw your A, B, and C all the same size, what we call the ladder diagram, then you might find that you're not able to get full marks. Now, what are the key annotations? Well, if you've just been asked to draw a diagram that shows the main characteristics of the soil, only include the first parts. So litter is composed of pine needles, thin black acidic mull humus, zone of illuviation, zone of illuviation in the B horizon. Iron pan forms in the B horizon. You might even say that it's made up of Fe iron and Al aluminium particles. Where the parent materials like to be glacial till. Okay, poor drainage, possible waterlogging resulting in glaying, limited soil biota, clearly defined soil horizons, shallow roots, vegetation is pine forests, and a cold, wet climate. Now, that is the labels that will get you full marks, along with the key things in the middle of the diagram, which is the color of our soil. It's ash gray in the A, and it's a kind of reddish, dark brown in the B. Okay. Other thing that you probably want to add is that in the A, we have a sandy texture, because the texture of the soil is a key component. So you need one statement that indicates something about the texture. So I'm just going to go with the sandy texture in my A horizon. And those are labels you can probably add onto the diagram itself rather than labels around the side with arrows pointing to them. Now, I've got a lot of other information in this diagram, and the reason for that is there is another type of exam question that comes up in the biosphere topic that relates to soil profiles, and it's where you are asked to explain the formation of one of these soils, or the conditions and processes that leads to the formation of one of these soils. And each of these sentence extensions in my diagram here are the explain points about the role that this plays in the soil. So what is a zone of alluviation, for example? Well, it's where high levels of leaching, which is to do with lots of rain coming in from the atmosphere, wash the minerals downwards. And the zone of illuviation is where that stuff all arrives deeper down in the soil. So it comes from the A horizon, it's deposited in the B. That also is how we get an iron pan forming. and it's formed by the deposited materials building up over time in the B horizon. Why do we have weathered parent materials at a glacial till? Well, they were laid down during the Ice Age by the melting glaciers, so that's a key point. Why don't we have many worms and other biota? Because of its very wet climate, and it's a very cold climate, which isn't conducive to living organisms in a soil. What's the impact of the poor drainage and the possible waterlogging? Well, it's going to cause a lack of worms and biota, and also the iron pan is restricting the movement of water down through the soil. Clearly defined horizons, because we don't have the main mixers, we don't have any worms, and therefore we can clearly see our A and our B. And if you look at one of these soils, you would be able to spot the different horizons. We've got our trees with shallow roots. We've got the role that vegetation and pine forests play. That's really important in your answer. And this final point is critical because this is a soil that forms in cold climates, which is why we have pine trees, because pine trees thrive in colder climates. They're adapted to it. But also very wet climates lead to this high level of leaching, and there's very little water coming back up through the soil through evaporation, which is why the soil ends up developing. So the answer I've gone through today can do two things. I've showed you the labels you would want to add if you were just targeting the question that focuses on the characteristics of, in this case, the Podzol. Just to remind you, that is the soil we're looking at. Or if you're actually asked to explain its formation, you could draw this diagram and just add the more extended annotations. That's where you go beyond the label, where you actually explain in detail the role of that label to get to be able to answer that second question. What I wouldn't recommend is if you are asked to describe the main characteristics of a soil, that you actually do the full annotations, because they go beyond what's actually required for the first of those questions.